Imagine this. You spend hours studying something. You read the book. You watch the lecture. You highlight the important lines. And for a moment, it feels like you understand everything. But then someone asks you a simple question. Can you explain it? Suddenly your mind goes blank. The words disappear. The ideas collapse. And you realize something uncomfortable. You never truly understood it. You only thought you did. This is the biggest lie in modern education. And almost everyone falls for it, but one man refused to accept that lie. His name was Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. One of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century. But what made him extraordinary was not just his intelligence. It was the way he learned. While others memorized formulas, Feynman did something completely different. He built a method that allowed him to understand almost anything. Physics, mathematics, engineering, even complex problems that confused other scientists. And the most shocking part, his method was incredibly simple. So simple that almost nobody believes it works. Yet today, millions of students, entrepreneurs, and scientists use it to learn faster than ever before. It is called the Feynman Technique. And once you understand how it works, learning will never feel the same again. The illusion that traps most people. The human brain is easily fooled. When we read something repeatedly, it begins to feel familiar. And familiarity creates a dangerous illusion. It tricks us into believing we understand something when we actually don't. Psychologists call this the illusion of knowledge. You recognize the words. You recognize the ideas. But if someone asks you to explain the concept clearly, you struggle. Because recognition is not understanding. Understanding means something much deeper. It means your brain can rebuild the idea from scratch. Without looking at notes. Without copying someone else's explanation. And that ability is extremely rare. Most people never train their minds to do it. They only memorize. But memorization is fragile. Information stored through memorization fades quickly. Within weeks, most of it disappears. That is why students forget almost everything after exams. But Feynman discovered something powerful. If you truly understand an idea, you should be able to explain it in the simplest possible language. No complicated words. No technical shortcuts. Just clear thinking. And this belief became the foundation of his learning method. The notebook of ignorance. Feynman had a strange habit. He carried a notebook everywhere. But this notebook was not filled with complicated physics equations. Instead, it contained something very unusual. Simple explanations. At the top of one notebook, he wrote a sentence that surprised people. Notebook of things I don't know about. Most people try to hide what they don't know. Feynman did the opposite. He actively searched for it. Whenever he encountered a concept he didn't fully understand, he wrote it down. Then he tried to explain it in plain language. As if he were teaching someone who knew nothing about the topic. If the explanation became confusing, that meant one thing. He did not truly understand it yet. So he returned to the books, studied again, and rewrote the explanation until it became clear. This process forced his brain to do something powerful. Instead of storing information temporarily, it rebuilt the concept from the ground up, piece by piece, until the idea became completely clear. Why simplicity reveals truth. There is a reason why this method works so well. Complex language can hide weak understanding. People often use difficult words and technical jargon to sound intelligent. But Feynman believed something very different. He believed that if you truly understand something, you should be able to explain it to a child. Not because the idea is simple, but because clarity is the ultimate proof of understanding. When you remove complicated language, only the true structure of the idea remains. And that structure is what the brain remembers. This is why Feynman could explain advanced physics concepts in a way that ordinary people could understand. His mind focused on the core principles, not the surface complexity. The difference between smart and effective. People often called Feynman a genius. But he disagreed. He once said something very revealing. People think I'm smarter than I am. I just work to understand things better. This statement reveals an important truth. The difference between average learners and extraordinary learners is not intelligence. It is strategy. Most people read information repeatedly and hope their brain remembers it. But the brain does not work that way. The brain remembers information that it actively processes. Information that it explains. Information that it reconstructs. That is why teaching someone else is one of the most powerful ways to learn. Because teaching forces the brain to organize knowledge clearly, and clarity strengthens memory. The beginning of the technique. Over time, Feynman refined his approach into a simple four-step process. A process that anyone can use. The first step begins with something deceptively simple. Choose a concept you want to learn. Write the concept at the top of a blank page. Then pretend you are teaching that idea to someone who knows absolutely nothing about the subject. This forces your brain to translate complex ideas into simple language. And the moment you try this, something interesting happens. You begin to discover the gaps in your understanding. The parts you cannot explain. The parts that confuse you. But those gaps are not failures. They are signals. They tell you exactly where your knowledge is weak. And once you find those weak points, you can return to study them again. This process continues until the explanation becomes clear and simple. And when that happens, the knowledge becomes permanent. Why this method changes everything. The Feynman technique transforms learning from passive consumption into active thinking. Instead of absorbing information, you reconstruct it. Instead of memorizing facts, you understand ideas. Instead of hiding confusion, you hunt it down. And this changes how the brain stores knowledge. Concepts become interconnected. Ideas become easier to recall. And learning becomes dramatically faster. But the most powerful part of this technique is still ahead, because the real magic happens when you apply the full four-step system. A system that can force your mind to master almost any subject. And in the next part of this documentary, we will break down those 4 steps in detail. Not just how to use them, but why they work inside the brain. Because once you understand how the mind truly learns, you gain a power that most people never discover. The ability to learn anything you want. What if the real reason you struggle to learn something is not because it is difficult, but because you are learning it the wrong way? Think about how most people study. They read. They highlight. They watch lectures. They repeat notes again and again. It feels productive. But in reality, the brain is doing very little work. It is simply recognizing information. And recognition is not learning. True learning happens only when the brain is forced to build knowledge from scratch. This is exactly what Richard Feynman discovered, and that discovery became one of the most powerful learning systems ever created. A system so simple that almost anyone can use it, but powerful enough to transform the way your brain understands the world. It is called the Feynman Technique, and it works through 4 deceptively simple steps. Yet these 4 steps can turn confusion into clarity faster than almost any other learning method. Step 1. Choose the idea you want to understand. The first step seems obvious. Pick the concept you want to learn, but this step contains a hidden rule that most people ignore. You must choose one specific concept. Not an entire subject. Not a whole chapter. Just one clear idea. For example, instead of writing, "Learn physics," you would write something much more precise. Understand how gravity works. Or instead of learn investing, you might write understand compound interest. This matters because the brain learns best when information is broken into clear units. Large, vague topics overwhelm the mind. But small, precise ideas are manageable. Feynman would write the concept at the top of a blank page. Then he would begin the most important step of the entire process. Step 2. Teach it like you're explaining to a child. Now imagine you must explain the concept to someone who knows absolutely nothing about it. Maybe a beginner. Maybe a child. You are not allowed to use complicated words. No technical language. No academic shortcuts. Just simple explanations. For example, if you were explaining gravity, you might say something like, gravity is the reason things fall toward the Earth. The Earth pulls objects toward its center. Simple. Clear. Direct. And as you begin explaining the concept, something fascinating happens. Your brain starts searching for the logic behind the idea. You are no longer copying information. You are rebuilding it. And very quickly, the brain reveals the truth. There will be parts you cannot explain. Sentences that feel unclear. Ideas that suddenly collapse. That moment is extremely important, because it reveals something most learners try to avoid. The gaps. Step 3. Find the gaps in your understanding. When your explanation breaks down, do not ignore it. That confusion is not a failure. It is a signal. It tells you exactly where your understanding is weak. This is where most people make a mistake. Instead of confronting confusion, they move on. They keep reading. They keep highlighting. They pretend they understand. But the confusion remains hidden. Feynman refused to do this. Whenever he encountered a gap, he returned to the source material. Books. Lectures. Research papers. He studied the missing piece until it made sense. Then he returned to his explanation and tried again. Each time the explanation became clearer. Stronger. Simpler. This cycle repeated again and again. Explain. Find the gap. Study the gap. Explain again. Over time, the concept transformed from confusing information into clear understanding. Step 4. Simplify until it becomes obvious. The final step is where the real power appears. Once you can explain the idea clearly, you simplify it even further. Remove complicated words. Replace technical terms with everyday language. Use examples. Use analogies. Turn the concept into something anyone could understand. Because when an explanation becomes extremely simple, it means something powerful has happened. Your brain has fully internalized the concept. You no longer rely on memorized sentences. You understand the idea deeply enough to rebuild it in your own words. And that kind of knowledge rarely disappears. It becomes part of your thinking. Why this method is so powerful. To understand why the Feynman technique works so well, we must look at how the brain stores information. When you passively read something, the brain processes it lightly. The information stays near the surface of memory. But when you explain something in your own words, the brain activates multiple systems at once. Language, logic, memory, creativity, all working together. This creates much stronger neural connections. And stronger connections mean longer-lasting knowledge. In other words, explanation forces the brain to build deep memory structures. And deep structures are what create real expertise. The hidden advantage of simplicity. There is another reason this method is so effective. Simple explanations reveal flaws immediately. If your explanation becomes confusing, it means something inside your understanding is still broken. This is why many experts struggle to teach beginners. They understand the advanced details, but they have forgotten the basic structure of the idea. Feynman believed that true mastery meant understanding both the complexity and the simplicity. Because when you truly understand something, you can move between those two levels effortlessly, turning learning into a habit. The real power of the Feynman technique appears when it becomes a daily habit. Imagine applying it every time you learn something new. A business concept, a scientific idea, a historical event, a financial strategy. Instead of memorizing it, you explain it. Instead of repeating it, you simplify it. And gradually your brain begins to change. You stop collecting information. You start building understanding. This difference may seem small at first, but over time it becomes enormous, because the world belongs to people who understand things deeply, not those who merely remember them. The next level of learning. But even the Feynman technique has a hidden layer most people never discover. A mental trick that forces the brain to learn even faster. A trick Feynman himself used constantly. It involves something unexpected. Curiosity. In the next part of this documentary, we will explore how curiosity can transform the brain into a powerful learning machine, and how Feynman used curiosity to understand problems that confused even the smartest scientists. Because once curiosity takes control of your mind, learning stops feeling like work and starts feeling like discovery.